Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our English podcast. My name is Jack, and I'm very happy you're here today. If you are learning English and you want to speak simple, real English, this podcast is for you. Today, I want to share about the history of Japan. Before we start, please like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend who is learning English. Good job for being here. Now, relax, sit comfortably, and let's start. Chapter 1: Ancient Japan and the Sun Goddess. Welcome to the history of Japan. To understand this nation, we must look at its geography. Japan is an archipelago, a chain of thousands of islands in the Pacific Ocean. Because it is located in the Far East, it is often called Nippon, or the land of the rising sun. In the beginning, Japanese history was a mix of beautiful legends and archaeology. According to ancient myths, the Japanese islands were created by the gods, and the first emperor, Jimmu, was a descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. This belief in a divine origin has shaped the Japanese identity for thousands of years. The Jomon and Yayoi periods. The earliest people in Japan were the Jomon. They were famous for their beautiful pottery decorated with cord marks. They were hunters and gatherers living in harmony with the forests and the sea. Around 300 BC, the Yayoi period began. This was a turning point. People from mainland Asia brought the knowledge of rice farming and metalworking. Suddenly, Japan transformed from a wandering society into a settled agricultural society. Rice became so important that it was used as money for many centuries. Chapter 2: The Rise of the Samurai, the Heian and Kamakura periods. 2.1: The Elegance of the Heian Court. In the year 794, the Japanese capital was moved to Heian-kyo, the city we now call Kyoto. This marked the beginning of the Heian period. For nearly 400 years, Kyoto was the center of a beautiful and sophisticated world. The nobles in the emperor's court spent their days writing poetry, practicing calligraphy, and attending tea ceremonies. It was a time of high art. In fact, during this period, a noblewoman named Murasaki Shikibu wrote The Tale of Genji, which many historians call the world's first novel. However, while the nobles in Kyoto were busy with art, the countryside was becoming dangerous. Bandits and thieves were attacking farmers and landowners. To protect their land, wealthy families began to hire private guards. These guards were the early samurai. 2.2: The Meaning of Samurai. The word samurai comes from the Japanese verb saburau, which means to serve. In the beginning, they were simply armed servants, but over time, they became a professional warrior class. Unlike the knights of Europe, samurai were not just soldiers, they were highly educated. They were expected to be masters of both the sword and the pen. A true samurai was as comfortable writing a poem about cherry blossoms as he was fighting on a battlefield. This balance of martial arts and fine arts is what made the samurai unique in world history. 2.3: Bushido, the warrior's soul. To maintain discipline, the samurai developed a strict moral code known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. Bushido was not a written law, but a set of values passed down through generations. Honesty. A samurai's word was more valuable than gold. Loyalty. A samurai was expected to be absolutely loyal to his lord or daimyo. Honor. To a samurai, honor was more important than life itself. If a samurai lost his honor, he would often perform a ritual suicide called seppuku to regain his dignity. The most iconic symbol of the samurai was the katana. This curved, razor-sharp sword was called the soul of the samurai. They believed that the spirit of the warrior lived inside the steel of his blade. 2.4. The Genpei War and the First Shogun. By the late 12th century, two powerful samurai clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, started a massive civil war for control of Japan. This was known as the Genpei War. In 1185, the Minamoto clan won a decisive naval battle. Their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, did not remove the emperor, but he took all the real power for himself. He moved his headquarters to a small fishing village called Kamakura. The emperor gave Yoritomo the title of shogun, which means great general. From this moment on, for nearly 700 years, Japan was ruled not by the emperors in Kyoto, but by the shoguns and their samurai armies. This was the birth of the military government known as the Bakufu. 2.5. Life in Kamakura, Japan. During the Kamakura period, life became simpler and more focused on strength and discipline. This was also the time when Zen Buddhism became popular among the samurai. Zen taught them how to remain calm in the face of death. It focused on meditation and self-control. This mental toughness helped the samurai face their greatest challenge, the Mongol invasions, which we will discuss in the next chapter. The samurai were no longer just guards. They were the masters of Japan's destiny. Chapter 3. The Mongol Invasions and the Divine Wind. 3.1. The Shadow of the Khan. In the late 12th century, a great power was rising in the West. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the ruler of the Mongol Empire, had conquered China and Korea. He was the most powerful man on earth. In 1268, Kublai Khan sent messengers to Japan. He demanded that Japan pay him tribute and accept him as their master. The emperor in Kyoto was terrified, but the samurai leaders in Kamakura were different. They refused to even answer the messengers. They were warriors, and they would not bow to anyone. Kublai Khan was furious and began preparing for a massive invasion. 3.2. The First Invasion, 1274. In 1274, the Mongol fleet arrived at Hakata Bay. They had thousands of soldiers, advanced weapons, and even early forms of bombs or thunder crash bombs. The samurai were used to one-on-one fighting. They would announce their names and fight with honor. But the Mongols fought in groups with poisoned arrows and explosives. The samurai were struggling. However, just as the Mongols were winning, a storm began to brew. Fearing they would be stranded, the Mongols returned to their ships. That night, a powerful storm wrecked many of their vessels, and the survivors fled. Japan was safe, but only for a while. 3.3. The Great Wall and Preparation. Jack Ma once said that failure is a test, but for the Japanese, victory was the test. They knew the Mongols would return. For 7 years, they prepared. They built a massive stone wall along the coast of Hakata Bay to stop the Mongol horses. The samurai trained harder than ever. When Kublai Khan sent more messengers, the samurai did something very bold. They executed them. This meant there was no turning back. War was coming, and this time, the Mongol fleet would be the largest the world had ever seen. 3.4. The Second Invasion and the Kamikaze, 1281. In 1281, the Mongols returned with two massive fleets and over 140,000 soldiers. For weeks, the samurai fought bravely behind their stone walls. The fighting was brutal. The Mongols could not break through the Japanese defenses easily because of the wall. Then, something legendary happened. On August 15, a massive typhoon, a giant storm, hit the coast. It lasted for 2 days. The Mongol fleet, tied together in the bay, was destroyed. Thousands of ships sank, and nearly 100,000 Mongol soldiers drowned. The Japanese people believed that their gods had heard their prayers. They called this storm the kamikaze, which means divine wind. They believed that Japan was a sacred land protected by the heavens. 3.5. The aftermath and change. The divine wind saved Japan from being conquered, but it brought new problems. Usually, after a war, the shogun would give land to the samurai as a reward, but this time, there was no land to give because they were defending their own territory, not conquering new ones. Many samurai became poor and angry. They began to lose trust in the Kamakura government. This dissatisfaction eventually led to the fall of the first shogunate and a new period of chaos. The legend of the kamikaze, however, stayed in the Japanese heart for centuries, giving them a sense of national pride and invincibility. Chapter 4. The Sengoku Period, the Age of Civil War. 4.1. The Collapse of Authority. After the Mongol invasions, Japan fell into a long period of instability. By the mid-15th century, the central government, the shogunate, had lost all control. Japan broke apart into dozens of small territories. This was the beginning of the Sengoku Jidai, or the Age of the Warring States. It was a century of constant blood, fire, and betrayal. There was no single law. The only law was the sword. Every local lord, known as a daimyo, fought his neighbors to become the ruler of Japan. 4.2. The Rise of the Ninja. In this time of chaos, open battle was not the only way to win. This was the golden age of the shinobi, more commonly known as the ninja. While samurai fought with honor on the battlefield, ninjas were experts in espionage, sabotage, and secret assassinations. They lived in the shadows and used unique weapons like the shuriken, or throwing stars, and kusarigama. Many daimyos hired ninjas to spy on their enemies or burn down their castles at night. The mystery of the ninja is a part of Japanese history that still fascinates the world today. 4.3. The Three Great Unifiers. Japan seemed doomed to eternal war, but three legendary leaders appeared. They are known as the Three Great Unifiers. Each one had a different personality, which is famously described in a Japanese poem about a bird that won't sing. Oda Nobunaga. He was the fierce and revolutionary leader. He said, "If the bird doesn't sing, kill it." He was the first to use European firearms, muskets, on a large scale, changing Japanese warfare forever. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He was Oda Nobunaga's best general. He said, "If the bird doesn't sing, make it want to sing." He rose from a humble peasant to become the ruler of Japan. He was a master of diplomacy and built the massive Osaka Castle. Tokugawa Ieyasu. He was the most patient. He said, "If the bird doesn't sing, wait for it to sing." He waited for the right moment to take power and establish a peace that would last for centuries. 4.4. The Battle of Sekigahara, 1600. The climax of this era happened in the year 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara. It was the largest samurai battle in history. On one side was the army of the West, and on the other was Tokugawa Ieyasu's army of the East. Thousands of samurai clashed in the fog. Because of a secret betrayal by one of the Western generals, Ieyasu won a massive victory. This single battle ended the age of civil war. Ieyasu was named shogun by the emperor, and he moved the capital to a small fishing village called Edo, the city we now call Tokyo. With the war over, the role of the samurai began to change. They were no longer just warriors, they became administrators and scholars. Hideyoshi had already started a sword hunt, taking weapons away from peasants so they couldn't rebel. Society was divided into 4 strict classes: samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants at the bottom. This structure brought stability, but it also made life very rigid. Japan was finally ready for a long period of peace and isolation, which we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 6: The Edo Period, the Great Peace and Isolation. 5.1 The Rise of Edo. After the victory at Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu established a new military government. He chose a small, swampy fishing village called Edo as his capital. Today, we know this city as Tokyo. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan entered a period of unprecedented peace that lasted for over 250 years. This era is often called the Pax Tokugawa. To keep control, the shogun created a strict system where local lords, daimyo, had to spend every other year in Edo. This kept them under the shogun's watchful eye and prevented them from starting new wars. 5.2 Sakoku, the Closed Country. One of the most famous parts of the Edo period was the policy of sakoku, which means closed country. The shogunate feared that foreign religions, especially Christianity, and foreign weapons would destabilize Japan. By 1635, it became illegal for Japanese people to leave the country, and almost all foreigners were banned. Only a small group of Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed to trade on a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki called Dejima. Japan became a time capsule, developing its own unique culture without any outside influence for 2.5 centuries. 5.3 A Culture of Art and Pleasure. Because there were no wars to fight, the samurai began to focus on education and administration. Meanwhile, the merchant class in the cities became wealthy. This led to the rise of a vibrant urban culture known as ukiyo, or the floating world. Haiku poetry. The famous poet Matsuo Basho traveled across Japan and perfected the 17-syllable haiku. Kabuki theater. This became the most popular form of entertainment, featuring elaborate makeup and dramatic acting. Ukiyo-e art. Artists like Hokusai created beautiful woodblock prints. His famous Great Wave off Kanagawa was created during this time, capturing the power of nature. 5.4 The Social Pyramid. Edo society was organized into 4 strict ranks. This was based on Confucian ideas to maintain order. Samurai, the ruling class, warriors turned bureaucrats. Farmers, respected because they produced the food, rice. Artisans, skilled workers who made clothes and tools. Merchants, at the bottom because they didn't produce anything, though they eventually became the richest class. Movement between these classes was almost impossible. Your life was decided the moment you were born. This brought peace, but it also created a lot of social pressure. 5.5 The Twilight of the Shogun. By the mid-19th century, the Edo system began to crack. The samurai were in debt to the merchants, and the shogunate was struggling with money. More importantly, the world outside was changing fast. Western nations were building steamships and powerful cannons. They wanted to open Japan for trade. In 1853, an American fleet of black ships appeared in Tokyo Bay. Japan's 250 years of isolation were about to end in a way that no one expected. The Great Peace was over, and the era of modern Japan was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Meiji Restoration, the Great Transformation. 6.1. The Arrival of the Black Ships, 1853. In July 1853, the peace of the Edo period was shattered. 4 massive American warships, puffing black smoke and carrying heavy cannons, sailed into Tokyo Bay. They were led by Commodore Matthew Perry. The Japanese had never seen steamships before. They called them the Black Ships. Perry delivered a letter from the U.S. president demanding that Japan open its ports for trade. The shogunate realized that his samurai swords were no match for modern Western technology. This created a huge crisis. Some Japanese wanted to fight the foreigners, while others realized that Japan must change or be conquered. For 15 years, Japan was in turmoil. Young, ambitious samurai from the south, especially from the Satsuma and Choshu regions, began a movement to overthrow the shogun. Their slogan was Sono Joi, which means revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. In 1868, they succeeded. The last Tokugawa shogun resigned, and the young Emperor Meiji, who was only 15 years old, was moved from Kyoto to Edo. Edo was renamed Tokyo, meaning Eastern Capital. This was the birth of modern Japan. 6.3. Learning from the West. The new Meiji government made a bold decision. They realized that to protect Japan, they needed to learn everything from the West. They sent experts all over the world to study. They copied the British Navy. They copied the German army and medicine. They copied the American banking and education systems. In just a few decades, Japan built railroads, telegraph lines, and massive factories. They abolished the 4-class system. Suddenly, a farmer's son could become a general or a businessman. Japan was moving at a speed the world had never seen before. 6.4. The end of the samurai. The most painful part of this era was the end of the samurai class. The government banned the wearing of swords in public and stopped paying the samurai their traditional salaries. Many samurai felt betrayed. This led to the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, often called the Last Samurai. A small army of traditional samurai fought against the new imperial army, equipped with modern rifles and cannons. The samurai lost. This marked the end of the warrior era. The age of the sword was over. The age of the machine had begun. 6.5. Japan as a world power. By the turn of the century, Japan's transformation was complete. In 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European power. Japan was no longer afraid being colonized. Instead, it had become a colonizer itself, taking control of Taiwan and Korea. The Meiji Restoration proved that a nation could modernize while still keeping its unique identity. However, this new military strength would eventually lead Japan down a dangerous path toward World War II. Chapter 7. World War II and the Nuclear Age. The Shadow of War. 7.1. The Rise of Militarism. After the success of the Meiji Restoration, Japan became a powerful nation. However, in the 1930s, the government lost its power to the military. Japan was a small island nation with very few natural resources, like oil and iron. To get these resources, the military leaders believed they had to expand their empire. Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and later started a full-scale war with China in 1937. This was a time of extreme nationalism. The people were taught that their emperor was a living god and that dying for Japan was the greatest honor. 7.2. Pearl Harbor and the Pacific War.
On December 7, 1941, Japan made a decision that would change the world. They launched a surprise air attack on the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Their goal was to destroy the American fleet so Japan could control the Pacific Ocean. The United States immediately entered World War II. At first, the Japanese military was very successful, conquering Southeast Asia and many islands. But soon, the massive industrial power of America began to turn the tide. The fighting in the Pacific was brutal, on land, in the air, and under the sea. 7.3. The Suffering of the People. By 1945, Japan was losing the war. American planes began bombing Japanese cities. Because most houses were made of wood and paper, the firebombings were devastating. In a single night in March 1945, a massive firebombing of Tokyo killed over 100,000 people. Food was scarce, and almost every young man was sent to fight. Even in these desperate times, the military refused to surrender. They prepared for a final suicidal defense of the home islands. This led to one of the most controversial decisions in human history. 7.4. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 1945. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima. It dropped the first atomic bomb ever used in war. In a single second, a blinding flash of light destroyed the city, killing tens of thousands of people instantly. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The power of the atom had changed warfare forever. Thousands more would die in the following weeks and years from radiation sickness. 7.5. The Surrender and the New Beginning. Facing total destruction, Emperor Hirohito did something no Japanese emperor had ever done before. He spoke to his people over the radio. In a high-pitched, formal voice, he announced that Japan would surrender. He told his people that they must endure the unendurable. On September 2, 1945, the war officially ended. Japan was occupied by American forces led by General Douglas MacArthur. The empire was gone. Japan was stripped of its military and given a new constitution that forbid the country from ever going to war again. From the ashes of the nuclear age, Japan had to find a new way to live.
Chapter 8. The Economic Miracle and Modern Japan. 8.1. Rising from the Ashes. In 1945, Japan was a broken nation. Its cities were in ruins, its factories were destroyed, and its people were starving. But the Japanese people have a famous saying, Nana korobi ya oki, which means fall 7 times, stand up 8. Instead of focusing on military power, Japan decided to focus on peace and technology. With the help of the United States through the Marshall Plan, Japan began to rebuild. But the real miracle came from the hard work, discipline, and education of the Japanese people themselves. 8.2. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics. The world first noticed Japan's incredible recovery during the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. This was a symbolic moment. Japan showed the world its new bullet train, or Shinkansen. It was the fastest train in the world, symbolizing Japan's move into the future. By the 1970s and 80s, Japan became the world's second largest economy. This period is known as the Japanese economic miracle. Families all over the world began buying Japanese products because they were the best in quality and technology. 8.3. The Giants of Innovation, Sony, Toyota, and Nintendo. Japanese companies changed the way we live. Transportation. Toyota and Honda created cars that were fuel-efficient and reliable, dominating the global market. Electronics. Sony created the Walkman, changing how the world listened to music. Entertainment. Nintendo and Sony PlayStation revolutionized the gaming industry. Japan didn't just copy technology, they improved it. They focused on Kaizen, a philosophy of continuous improvement. Every day, every worker tried to make their product a little bit better than the day before.
8.4. Pop culture, anime, and manga. Modern Japan's influence is not just in cars and chips, it is in its culture. Anime, animation, and manga, comics, became a global phenomenon. Characters like Pikachu, Naruto, and Goku are known by children in every country. Japanese food, especially sushi and ramen, became popular worldwide. This soft power made Japan one of the most loved and respected countries in the world. People no longer saw Japan as a land of war, but as a land of creativity, art, and delicious food. 8.5. Japan in 2026, Facing the Future. As we look at Japan today in 2026, the country faces new challenges. It has one of the oldest populations in the world, and the birth rate is very low. To solve this, Japan is turning to its greatest strength, robotics. From robot assistants in hospitals to automated cafes, Japan is showing the world how technology can help an aging society. Despite the modern skyscrapers of Tokyo, the Japanese still respect their traditions. You can still find people practicing tea ceremonies, wearing kimonos, and visiting ancient Shinto shrines. Japan remains a beautiful harmony of the past and the future. The Journey of Japan. 1. A quick look back. We have traveled through thousands of years of history. Let's summarize the key moments that made Japan what it is today. The roots. We saw the ancient Jomon and Yayoi periods, where rice farming and myths of the sun goddess began. The warriors. We watched the rise of the samurai in the Heian period and their legendary discipline under the code of Bushido. The protection. We felt the power of the kamikaze storms that saved Japan from the Mongol invasions twice. The chaos and peace. We witnessed the bloody Sengoku civil wars, followed by 250 years of total isolation and peace in the Edo period. The change. We saw the Meiji Restoration, where Japan transformed from a sword-fighting nation to an industrial power in record time. The tragedy. We walked through the dark days of World War II and the devastating impact of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Finally, we saw Japan rise from the ashes to become a global leader in technology, cars, and pop culture. 2. 3 lessons from Japan's history. What can we learn from the history of Japan for our own lives in 2026? Resilience. Japan proves that no matter how hard you fall, you can always stand up again. From the ruins of 1945 to the miracle of the 1960s, they never gave up. Harmony of old and new. Japan shows us that you can use the latest robots and technology while still respecting your ancestors and ancient traditions. The power of discipline. Whether it was a samurai training with his sword or an engineer building a bullet train, the Japanese focus on perfection and Kaizen, continuous improvement, is a lesson for everyone. A final word to the learners. For those of you practicing your English through this story, remember the samurai. They believed that mastery takes time and constant practice. Learning a language is like forging a katana. It requires heat,
patience, and many layers of work. Thank you for joining me on this 6,000-word journey through the history of Japan. Your dedication to listening is the first step towards your own success. Keep practicing, stay curious, and as the Japanese say, ganbatte, do your best. Thank you for listening. Keep practicing every day. This is Jack. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.